question about the timing. And this was sort of a two-part question. It's basically how long does it typically take for a new treatment to move from research to being available to patients? And the second part of that I know is that this particular patient was curious. Let's say you missed out for various reasons in joining a clinical trial. And then early on in the data, because sometimes before the trial ends, data is presented at a big show like San Antonio, and they start to see positive data. And if you feel left out that you missed out on that trial, is there a way that you could still get that drug, or how long typically would you have to wait to get access to it?
So this is something that happens a lot. So the first part of that question is, the timing, it can take a long time for a drug to get approved. It can take up to 10 years and sometimes even longer from that original drug discovery to FDA approval. Now, once something starts in humans, a lot of it depends too on, the population that it's testing. How quickly can that study accrue, right? If they're hoping to accrue let's say 5,000 patients, well, how quickly can they get those patients onto the study? And then what is their endpoint? So if they're looking to see, when all trials are developed, they have these interim analyses where they say, okay, we've given people these drugs, we're going to check it at 6 months, or we're going to check it at 9 months, and sometimes it's longer. So depending on how the study is designed and what their endpoint is, can kind of guide, is it going to be a shorter approval or a longer approval? In terms of, this happens all the time, people miss out on a study, and they can miss out on a study for a number of reasons. It's not available where they're being treated. Sometimes we see this all the time, you have to be within, let's say, 12 months of your surgery, and now you're 13 months, right? And you just missed the window. And unfortunately, there's not really a good way to get that drug unless it's FDA approved. Sometimes, if the data is very compelling, and we've seen this with some breast cancer drugs recently, we can get them approved by the insurance even without an FDA approval. That's rare, but sometimes we can do that. And otherwise, sometimes, again, if the data is very compelling, sometimes the company will release it for compassionate use. A lot of it really depends on, is this drug already approved for something else, right? So where we saw this, I'll give you an example, was Keytruda for triple negative breast cancer. So the data came out that it was really compelling for stage 2 and stage 3 triple negative breast cancer with pembrolizumab and neoadjuvant chemo, and it wasn't yet approved. But because Keytruda was approved for so many other things in the cancer space, we were able to get it for some patients even without that specific FDA approval. If a drug doesn't have any FDA approval in that disease type, it's a little bit harder to get it. So it really depends. If you've missed out on a trial, I would urge people to go to clinicaltrials.gov. Sometimes there are additional trials recruiting for that drug, and really talking to your oncologist about, is this something, how does this impact me? But it can be very hard if someone missed out on something. I will say that if the data, if the drug is like these interim safety analyses and efficacy analyses are presented, all of the trials, when they're written, have these hard stops for which, if the data is so compelling, they will move forward. Like, the FDA does not want to withhold drugs from patients if the efficacy is so strong. And on the flip side, they actually will terminate studies if the pre-specified analyses don't meet the endpoints. So, that sometimes can change the timing of the approvals as well.
Okay. That is really encouraging that sometimes it gets fast tracked, or sometimes if it's really the appropriate fit for a certain patient scenario, that there are situations where that can get approved. I also think that's really great advice to look if there was one trial that had a specific drug you were interested in, to see if there are other trials for the same drug. Also, maybe a similar class of drugs. So I guess I'm thinking like CDK4/6 inhibitors, where there's three different ones, and maybe you didn't get in a trial for a certain one, but there are other options that are technically a different drug but the same class of drug, if that's the right way to say that.
Exactly. And the FDA does have mechanisms in place for things to expedite approval. So this is called fast track or breakthrough therapy or priority review, which are all designed to get the drug faster to patients if there's a benefit.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Um,